DW Inside Europe.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. It is Eurovision Finals week, so we've gone all out on a Euro culture special.
Listen, everybody, we're back in Sweden, and I know, don't blame me, even I voted for Finland. But we're so happy that you are back.
We really are. Welcome back to Malmo, Sweden's bridge to the rest of the world. Or as we say in Sweden, Mamma Mia, here we go again.
Alongside the hottest takes from Malmo 2024, we'll also be bringing you the best of Live Europe in Brussels and the arrival of the Olympic torch in Marseille. Enjoy, because this is about as lycra-packed as Inside Europe is ever likely to get. Yes, get out your sequins and glitter. The week of the 2024 Eurovision Song Contest finale has arrived. As Daniel Rosny reported for us last week, the world's biggest live music event is taking place this year in the Swedish city of Malmo, which is linked to the Danish capital Copenhagen by a very long and iconic bridge. This year's motto is United by Music, but as Daniel already intimated last week, that motto is being sorely tested. I caught up with Daniel just after the semi-finals to find out more.
Malmo is a very international city. It's a very diverse place. According to city officials, the population is made up of 186 countries. It's a very young city, almost half under the age of 35, and there are some estimates that suggest between 25 and 30% of the population are Muslim. And the reason that it is dividing the city, this song contest that aims to unite people, is because there are large pro-Palestinian protesters that are angry that Israel is participating in this year's Eurovision Song Contest and that there is an Israel team here in the host city. So what you have kind of the Eurovision madness, the party elements around the arena where people who are very lucky to have got tickets, they're dressed up in their best Eurovision costumes, they've got their country's flags wrapped around them. But then you do have these protests taking place in different parts of the city. Freedom of speech is very important to the Swedes, so it is very hard for the Swedish police to turn down a request to protest. So there are two huge pro-Palestinian protests planned around Israel's participation. The Swedish police have had to ask Norway and neighbouring Denmark for extra officers to help ensure that the protests can take place safely, but also ensure that the Eurovision fans who have travelled here, 100,000 of them, can enjoy the city in a safe manner as well.
I mean, listeners, Daniel, may be thinking, well, hang on, this is Eurovision, why is Israel involved? Can you just explain to me a little bit the background to that?
So the song contest is organised by the European Broadcasting Union, which was created in 1950. And it's made up of a group of public service broadcasters. And any broadcaster that is a member of the EBU can take part, which is why we see places like Azerbaijan, Australia and Georgia on the stage. Israel was the first outside of the European continent to take part in Eurovision, and that was back in 1973. And Israel is really good at Eurovision. In the 70s, very quickly after it joined, it won it twice back to back. Then in 1998, Dana International became the first transgender singer to claim victory. And then in 2018, Netta, with her song Toy, was top of the leaderboard, meaning the contest the following year was in Tel Aviv, and that was my first in-person Eurovision. And because of the time zone difference, it didn't start until way later in the evening. So you had all day at the beach.
This year, a very different Eurovision, not sunny and beach-like at all. Israel's entry is 20-year-old Eden Golan with a song called Hurricane.
Yeah, so the song that was originally going to be sent to Malmo was a song called October Rain, which allegedly made reference to the October the 7th Hamas terrorist attacks. And the EBU organisers allegedly said that it was political messaging. I spoke with her team at the time and they were adamant it wasn't political messaging, and like all art, it was reflecting their surroundings. But because the Eurovision rules say that songs can't be political, a couple of lyrics were changed, and that song is now called Hurricane, and that is the song that Edun Galan is performing at Eurovision this year.
OK, so the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, has a clear no political statements policy. There's a grey area, though, isn't there, with symbolism?
There is, and that's because it's open to interpretation. But if you look at the Irish act, Bambi Thug, this year, Bambi has been very vocal about the conflict over the past couple of months. They have signed statements. They have said on Irish TV that if they weren't competing, they would probably be taking part in the boycott of the Eurovision Song Contest, because there is a boycott with some fans who feel that the EBU has double standards when it comes to which wars it condemns and which war it doesn't. As I've said, the EBU insists that this is a broadcasting competition and not one between governments. But when you watch Bambi Thug's performance on stage, they have keys at the end of their long nails. And that is a Palestinian symbol. It has been so for such a long time.
Yes, it's a symbol that will be familiar to anyone who has seen a Palestinian refugee camp. Often these keys are hanging above the entrances to homes, and they symbolise the homes that were lost in the 1948 mass displacement of Palestinians, which Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or disaster. But this symbol, Daniel, I wanted to ask you about this, because this symbol is also being used by the Ukrainian delegation.
Yes. So the Ukrainian duo, they are handing out keys in the city whenever they have an opportunity to have their picture taken. Their key represents unlocking the education for school children in Ukraine. They are raising a lot of money for a school in Ukraine that was destroyed as a result of Russia's invasion of their country. And again, for a lot of Ukrainians who have been displaced, this key has also become a symbol because they also want to one day return to their home.
This key survived under ruins.
Attack, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that even for you, your keys from home, it's your remembering that you have some super cool place where you are feel safety, when you have some memories, you know.
The Ukrainian Eurovision duo Alonia and Jerry Heil there. I have to say, Daniel, I really enjoyed their piece. Do you think we could be looking at another Ukrainian win?
For the first time in a long time, I don't know who will take the crown, but it could be anybody's to win. And then we will get to find out where we will be next year, because the main prize of winning Eurovision is that your country gets to host it the following year.
A big thank you to Daniel Rosny there for unpicking some of the thornier aspects of this year's Eurovision for us. Now, though, enough of the politicking. Let's spend a few minutes immersing ourselves in the full-on fun and glory of this most quirky of European cultural phenomena. DW's man in Malmo is Andreas Brenner, quite possibly the biggest Eurovision fan on staff, and that really is saying something.
My 12-point artist will get only the second place. That's what bookmakers say, and in the past years they have always correctly predicted the winner. My 12-point artist is not Baby Lasagna from Croatia, but Nemo from Switzerland.
Da ist Nemo mit The Code.
Can you imagine singing on an unstable surface that is constantly swinging back and forth? Nemo can do it very well, but he cannot break the code yet and win the Eurovision Song Contest. The craziest performance in Malmo was for sure by Bambi Thug from Ireland. Gothic metal, pop and techno in a song like Doomsday Blue. Just crazy, funny, cool. Definitely the Finnish Microsoft, no, sorry, Windows 95 man. The man can't sing, someone else sings for him, and he just runs around the stage almost naked. Because of the performances like No Rules, Eurovision is viewed as a freak show. And by the way, and just between us, his ass, which we can see for almost 3 minutes, could be more athletic. To be serious, this is the third Eurovision Song Contest that takes place at the time of war, or exactly 2 wars, Russia's war against Ukraine and Israel's war against Hamas. That affects the countries participating in Eurovision. Almost everyone has the same point of view on the war in Ukraine, but not on the war against Hamas. And if we talk about Eurovision like a music competition, I have never seen so much fire and naked skin on the Eurovision Song Contest stage. It's like its slogan now is Fire, Sex and Eurovision, and not united by music.
Andreas Brenner there, Eurovision superfan and head of DW Russia Online News and Current Affairs Department. Yeah, you heard that right. Meanwhile, I'm just plain old Kate Laycock, here for you on Inside Europe. Eurovision is by no means the only European music event of note this week. May 9th is Europe Day, and in Brussels, the hottest ticket in town was the Ancienne Belgique, the venue for the 10th ever Europe Day event from Liveurope, the pan-European initiative supporting concert venues in their efforts to promote European music diversity and also up-and-coming European talent. When I spoke to Liveurope's general coordinator, Elise Farmigia, ahead of the event, she told me that there was a lot to celebrate.
This year we're celebrating the 10 years of Liveurope, which is an initiative that we created in 2014 at the same time as the Creative Europe program of the EU was created. So it's the funding program for the cultural and creative industries. We are also celebrating the 20 years of the EU's biggest enlargement. And I think that's quite, for me, it's quite a symbolic moment because I remember as a child growing up, when the enlargement happened, it was pushing people in the streets, generating scenes of joys. And we see in contrast today, we're in a day and age where, well, basically Europe doesn't make people dream anymore. And so I think that's really why 10 years ago we started to celebrate Europe Day at Ancienne Belgique to really put Europe center stage in the music venues because we really wanted, as a Live Europe platform, to, let's say, find a way and show a more concrete face of Europe through its diverse cultures and music scene. And that's why we're glad to be joining forces with many partners from across the European institutions and in particular the European Parliament, so we can really amplify this campaign they have going on, which is called Use Your Vote, and hope to push voter turnout.
Now, Elise, the news cycle and politics in general, it's pretty brutal at the moment. And there may be a lot of people thinking, yeah, but hang on, I want music to be a place of escape. I don't necessarily want music and politics to be mixed. What's your take on that? And why have you decided to so explicitly couple the Live Europe event with getting out the vote for the European elections?
So the European elections, they are the world's second largest democratic elections. And yet we see that there's a very limited voters turnout. I think the latest polls in France show that only 45% of the electors intend to vote. And for us, this is quite concerning because we see from the perspective of Live Europe and also more in general that European funding and European legislation has an immense impact on people's lives. Again, in the case of Live Europe, it has helped thousands of artists meet new audiences. It has helped music venues diversify their program and actually take more risks when they book up-and-coming acts and to show to their audiences, whether it is Irish rappers or Hungarian metal bands or folk artists from Portugal. Like it has helped our venues to showcase those artists to audiences, to citizens. So in that perspective, for us, it's essential that the EU can continue this kind of work. And when you cast your ballot, you should really think of the kind of culture you want to support because it will be a decisive thing.
And the Europe Day event indeed will begin with a discussion with some pretty hard-hitting speakers. And the topic there will be what the future has in store for European music and what the EU can do to make it thrive. Tell me a bit more about that.
During our event, we're going to organize this discussion, and the goal is to look into the future trends that the European music sector is going to go through, and based on that, look at the needs that the music sector will have. We're going to be doing this with this initiative, which is called One Voice for European Music, that gathers organizations from across the sector and they all together looked at the needs of the sector to really show to policymakers the kind of policy that we could make. So the idea is also to show here that with a little bit more investment, there could be a way to unlock the potential for the music sector and let it thrive.
Well, on that note of thriving, Elise, I'd love to invite you to tell me a little bit about some of the acts that you've been most excited to support this year.
On average, we support over 700 shows, but some of the acts that we can talk about definitely is the acts that will be taking center stage during our Europe Day event. I'm really excited because this lineup is going to involve both a selection of Belgian and European artists. Since it's the Belgian presidency of the EU, we really wanted to showcase some talents that we've supported in the last 10 years with Live Europe, including Compact Disc Dummies, which is an electro-punk band. Two brothers from Belgium, as well as a more emerging act, which is Chibi Chigo, that will really make audiences dance. And then on the European side, we will have Bad Daughter, which is an indie band from Zagreb.
Can keep your mouth shut. A type of guy that can be crushed. You think it's your right.
And Magia Bruta.
Cuando escuches esto, debes saber que yo lo siento igual de triste que tú. Miro hacia adentro, voy volando lento. Ya ni siquiera pienso en las veces que me lastimé.
Which are a little bit more into expensive and mystical pop. So yeah, it's going to be quite a diverse selection, and the night will end with a Belgian DJ called Stanislava, who actually really focuses on the culture of Eastern Europe. So that's also going to be quite exciting in terms of mix and genres.
The European melting pot there on one stage on the 9th of May. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, we're really excited to invite our audiences to join for this great event.
Massive thanks to all of the artists for their permission to use their music there, as well, of course, to Live Europe's Elise Farmigia for the interview. We have one more cultural event that we would like to highlight this week, and that is the arrival of the Olympic torch on French soil ahead of this summer's Paris Olympics. Natalie Carney was there to see the touchdown, or should that be torchdown, in Marseille, and collected these impressions for us.
The arrival of the Olympic torch in Marseille was far more symbolic than many outsiders understood. Legend has it that France's oldest city was founded by Greek settlers, giving it a special connection to the Olympics that few other French cities can boast, says Marseille local Jean-Marc.
Cette ville a été créée par les Grecs.
He explains how the city was discovered by Greeks who arrived on a boat. So to have the Olympic torch from Greece also arrive by boat was like reliving history.
Ça se passe à Marseille ce soir.
On Wednesday, history was made again when the world watched as the Olympic torch sailed into port on the historic three-mast French maritime treasure, the Baleine, arriving in France 12 days after setting sail from the Greek capital, Athens. City officials say 150,000 people descended on Marseille for the occasion, described as the first highlights of Paris 2024, such as resident Muriel.
The atmosphere, all the boats following the Baleine, the energy, people are very happy, are very festive. That's nice.
Marseille Mayor Benoît Péan took in the occasion with French President Emmanuel Macron and was very proud of the celebrations his city had put on.
Juste incroyable, une préparation des gens.
It's just incredible. People's preparation for work, popular enthusiasm. A city that's 2,600 years old, a city which has been in the history of French culture, which will uphold the high values of the Olympics, the values of self-displacement of the fraternity of sport, the values of solidarity, which correspond to the values of the city. And I'm very proud of it.
It's almost unique, you know.
Amongst the crowd was Arnaud Dorlan, a lucky French citizen chosen to be one of the 10,000 torchbearers that will carry the flame across France and its territories up to the capital, Paris, for the opening ceremony on July 26th.
For me, being a torchbearer is a unique opportunity to celebrate the Olympic Games. Definitely, there is a lot of values behind Olympic Games that are resonating for me around excellency, around also being able to have a high performance, and also it's something around the world, you know. It's kind of union, a time of peace, a time of being together. You can compete and be friends, and into the world, I think it means a lot.
This world can bring dangers, a concern not overlooked by the communal happiness and revelries taking place along the banks of Marseille's old port. Behind the scenes, more than 6,000 security personnel were actively keeping a watchful eye at a time when the country is on its highest terrorist alert. And it worked. The celebrations went ahead without a hitch. Though the torch is now well on its journey towards Paris, the party is far from over for Marseille. It will also host 2 Olympic events this summer, Olympic sailing and 10 of the Olympic football matches. Natalie Carney, DW, Marseille.
We've brought you sport, we've brought you spangles. Now it's time for me to quickly remind you of our feedback address, insideeurope@dw.com, and that this is Inside Europe, and I am Kate Laycock in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. Our cultural content continues this half hour, although perhaps this part of the show should come with a gluten warning. To give ourselves a bit of a breather whilst we gear up for our European elections coverage, we decided to invite our colleagues over at DW's Don't Drink the Milk podcast to share one of their many meandering journeys through the back alleys of European cultural transmission with us. What did Rachel Stewart and her team come up with? Bagels.
Rozwalenie telefonu. Chinese whispers. Telefono senza fili. Telephone. Kulak dan kulak. Испорченный телефон. Глухой телефон. Russian scandal. Don't drink the milk.
Once I saw a bagel-themed apartment online, I couldn't not book it for producer Sam and I. After all, we are in the city that is thought to be the original home of the bagel. And no, it's not New York City.
The first mention that I was able to find of the Jewish bagel was in 1610 in Krakow.
Krakow, Poland. That's Maria Belinska. She's the author of the book The Bagel, The Surprising History of a Modest Bread.
I discovered bagels in my 20s as a graduate student in the United States. This was back in the 80s, and then I went to Poland on a scholarship to learn Polish.
Maria didn't set out to become the go-to person on bagel history, but an exploration of Jewish American foods led her deep into the backstory of the bagel. It also helped her to reflect on her own heritage.
I'm Polish American. My Polish family is part Catholic, part Jewish, and this history of Poland being based on Catholics and Jews and where they came together, as indeed my family came together, can be told through food.
So back to that bagel reference from 1610. It was in something called the Sumptuary Laws, which were made by Jewish elders in Krakow.
They were meant to give guidance to how certain things that were in short supply were to be consumed. So you had actually such laws around jewelry. But anyway, the bagel found its way into these laws.
Back then, wheat was a scarce ingredient. So Maria says anyone who got their hands on a bagel would have been pretty lucky.
This was a precious bread, and it was very clearly stated that it would be consumed at the bris, so the circumcision of a male infant.
The bagel's Jewish roots may not come as a surprise. I mean, just think about some bagel vocabulary. The schmear of cream cheese, the salmon topping known as lox. These are Yiddish words. Even the word bagel itself. It's thought to come from the Yiddish bagel or beigel, meaning ring. So, what makes a bagel different from your average piece of bread? A bagel is only a bagel if it's briefly boiled before baking. And, of course, it must have a hole.
On the one hand, it makes them easy to store. Traditionally, bagels were carried on a rope or on a pole. Going back a step further in the production of them, having a hole in the middle means that you have more surface area. The heat will cook the dough more evenly.
There are plenty of ring-shaped breads around the world. In Turkey, Belarus, Finland.
Among the Uyghurs in northern China, in Italy, the ciambelle, which you can see from Renaissance paintings, there's even a little baby Jesus holding a bagel. Well, it's not a bagel, it's actually a ciambelle.
But of all the possible precursors to the bagel, one of the oldest examples brings us right back to Krakow in Poland.
Oh, I think I see an aubergine stand. It looks like there's some paprika in there. Maybe we should try that. This one? Yeah. Thank you. I know we've had a lot of bread today, but like that's legit. It's like everything bagel taste, but like different consistency.
Yeah. Excuse me. Do you speak English? So. Do you know where the Bagel Museum is? Aubergine Museum.
Bagel Museum?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay.
That's it?
Here we are.
Wait, so this is the word you've been saying. How do you say it?
Aubergine.
Krakow bagels.
Now it's time for the fun part. So you have to braid your obwarzhanek. So one in front and then another. So you will be having, I don't know, something that looks like Italian fusilli or DNA.
And now Veronica is giving us the inside scoop on how to make them.
Okay, so the most traditional Polish Kraków obwarzanek should be, of course, round. So now we have to connect two edges of your twisted obwarzanek snake together.
This twisted round bread pops up in the financial accounts of Queen Jadwiga of Poland, way back in the year 1394. She spent 1 whole grosz on the treat.
Today, 1 grosz from Jadwiga's times would cost about 70 Polish zloty. So it would be pretty expensive. Maybe Jadwiga was that hungry. Maybe she had some kind of a feast to attend to. We don't know that today, but we know that she did buy obwarzanki back then. We have here 3 toppings to choose from, the most traditional ones. So first we have salt, second poppy seeds, and third, sesame seeds.
Or do you want to do salt or do poppy seed then? Because I'm going to have 2 different ones. Yeah.
They need to take a bath in the very hot water, and the process will take about 10 seconds for each obwarzanki.
Krakow is clearly proud of its obwarzanki. I mean, we're in a whole museum dedicated to it right now. There are obwarzanek souvenirs in every tourist shop. But what about the bagel?
I think not every Krakowian knows even that bagel came from Krakow. I think it's the fashion that is coming now, and bagels today are becoming more and more popular. But we think as them as American thing, not Polish. We don't even know that bagels are part of our tradition.
The first synagogue was called the Old Synagogue. So the second was called the New, of course, right? A super short version. Long and proper would be a new synagogue of blessed memory of Rabbi Remo. Small pauper synagogue. Yeah, let's go in. And there was another synagogue right there, and because that synagogue was on a hillock, it was called the synagogue on a hillock. And that was another synagogue here, and that was another one just around the corner.
I'm in Kazimierz, Krakow's Jewish quarter. Historian and tour guide Tomasz is taking us through the narrow streets, with their wonky cobbles and, yes, lots of synagogues.
Look at those balconies. Whenever you see the courtyard like that, you're absolutely sure, right away you know, once upon a time the place was Jewish.
We've ducked into a side alley with narrow balcony walkways above us and a small central courtyard. It feels familiar. In fact, it is familiar. This is one of the many parts of the city where Schindler's List was filmed. Steven Spielberg's Oscar award-winning historical movie was about one man who saved the lives of more than 1,000 Polish Jews during the Holocaust.
People are queuing right there, usually holding their things, suitcases or whatever they had, and then every 10 people you can find German officer usually taking the suitcase, opening it and throwing that down, right?
The film is based on a true story, and Tomasz tells us other tales of real people from this area. People who were banished to a Jewish ghetto on the other side of the river, before being sent to Nazi concentration camps. Camps like Auschwitz, which is actually just an hour from here. In the centuries leading up to the Holocaust, Jews had been expelled from one country after another in Europe. Many ended up here in Poland, which became known as the centre of Jewish European life. In the 17th century, it was home to 3/4 of all Jews on the continent. But what brought them here?
Starting from the 9th century, you had people being invited into Poland from Germany, and that would mean Gentiles and Jews coming into Polish cities to develop the artisanal life. And that would have included bakers. There were all kinds of regulations around Jews and bread because of the significance of bread for Christians, right? Because of the communion bread. But in the case of Polish cities, the regulations were less strict.
So Jewish communities began to grow in Poland, and at some point, bakers started making bagels. By the 19th century, they were pretty commonplace. More wheat was being cultivated in Europe, and machines were developed to make it into flour.
Ironically enough, it's also American flour that starts coming into the European market, and therefore the price of wheat flour goes down dramatically. Bagels become much more cheap to make.
By the 1920s, Maria explains that bagels have kind of become synonymous with poverty and a low social status. She came across this study from the era, which included first-hand accounts from bagel peddlers in the capital Warsaw, most of whom would have been Jewish.
And it's just a litany of horrible stories. In theory, you needed a license to peddle on the streets of a city, and many of these people couldn't afford it, so they would be chased by policemen, and one of them had fallen under a tram and lost their leg. You know, there was a lot of poverty in Poland in the 1930s, and this was one of the best examples of how difficult life was for certain people.
Facing economic hardship and growing anti-Semitism, huge numbers of Jewish immigrants left Eastern Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They headed across the Atlantic, with the bagel in tow.
To begin with, you had, of course, a concentration of Jewish culture in Manhattan, in New York, on the Lower East Side. And bagels were very much an ethnic food alongside things like rye bread, and limited to the Jewish community, but also important to the Jewish community. So you see things like advertisements telling Jewish potential immigrants back in Europe that, you know, you'll be able to drink coffee and have bagels when you get to the United States.
But for some of these immigrants, their dreams of freedom and prosperity would be sadly far from reality.
The conditions in which bakers in general were working were pretty terrible conditions. They would have been in the basements. People working 12, 13 hours a day. The air, you can imagine, because it was either wood or coal-fired ovens, lots of flour. Bakers were actually collapsing quite early in terms of their health. They were frightened of going on strike because they were saving up money to get more people to come over from their home village back in Europe to the United States, and so that would have jeopardized their plans.
But eventually the Jewish Bakers' Union was born, and in 1909 they went on strike. It was a success. They managed to secure shorter working hours, better hygiene.
And many people see this 1909 bakers' victory as a precursor to the victory of the garment workers, which is usually what is hailed as the great sort of turning point in labor union fortunes in the United States. But, you know, I think there is a good case to be made that the bakers led the way.
By 1937, the bagel bakers had formed their own breakaway union, with the power to bring bagel baking to a halt in New York City. Which they did. Here's a front-page headline from the New York Times in 1951.
Bagel famine threatens in city. Labor dispute puts hole in supply.
Interestingly, this same article describes the bagel rather coldly as
the donut with rigor mortis.
Oh, so the bagel wasn't an immediate hit with everyone. Initially, it was mostly enjoyed within the Jewish community. And it also got a bit of a makeover over the years. Smaller hole, softer dough, sliced in half and topped with delicious fillings. Here's why New Yorkers today love their bagels.
There's something to the texture. There's like a moistness, chewiness, and crispiness.
I think it's partly the history of New York that makes them so good too.
The fluffiness and the outside of the bagel when it's a little crispy is very good. I just love bagels, yeah.
A person just doesn't feel whole if they've gone through, a few days without having a bagel.
Bagel and pizza is good things that New Yorkers know how to do.
Because we love to eat food on the go. If you get a bagel like any other state, it's just usually kind of lackluster. Here they're very good. They're just superior in every way.
But there's another city that might try and claim that superior title.
Our bagel are very easy to eat. They're very light. The New York bagel, naturally and designed that way, are a heavier type of bagel bread that are designed to really fill you up. The Montreal bagel are very, very light. Then they're boiled in honey. So you can taste it on the outer shell of the bagel.
Around the turn of the 20th century, Eastern European Jews weren't just migrating to the US. Many ended up in Canada too. Rhonda Schlafman's grandparents came over from Ukraine. Her grandfather, Isidore, opened up the Fairmount Bagel Bakery in Montreal in 1919.
The bagels originally were like a horseshoe. They weren't closed. And for transportation and delivery, it wasn't very convenient. So my grandfather started closing them like a circle. He used to take string and string 12 bagels together, and he would deliver them hanging from the string.
Most bagel connoisseurs I've spoken to for this episode have made it pretty clear that they don't think the flavours should be messed with too much. And the only acceptable sweet variety is the cinnamon raisin. But Rhonda, who is the fourth generation of her family to run the bakery, is more open.
The blueberry and the all-dressed and the pumpernickel, and then, it's quite interesting. It's fun. Now we have a new one called cranberry pumpkin. It's my favorite flavor. But a lot of people get really upset. They say it's not a real bagel. What are you doing? You shouldn't do that. Shame on you. But they're really good. So I don't agree.
What about the methods? I mean, are the traditional methods still the same, or have things changed a lot over the years?
100% the same. Yeah, nothing's changed in our bakery. It's like a step back in time. We still boil the bagels. We still have the same brick oven that was built way back in the day for my grandfather. We still use the hardwood utensils for manipulation of the bagels in the oven. All the new bakeries use stainless steel. We still have the old-fashioned copper pots. The only thing over time that has changed for us is having the dough mixer.
Ah, the mixer, which brings us back to the United States. It's the mid-20th century. You know those baking unions we heard about before? Well, they're losing power in the face of a new threat: industrialization. Handmade bagels did survive a lot longer than other goods, simply because of the challenges of making a machine that could cope with such a dense dough.
What brought success was collaboration between an engineer and an ambitious family of bagel bakers.
That's Maria again. She's telling me about Harry Lender, who had moved from Poland and set up a bagel bakery in West Haven, Connecticut in 1927.
And his 3 sons were very ambitious about getting more people to eat bagels. And they decided they wanted to bagelize America.
In order to do that, they were going to need a lot more bagels. And that's where the bagel making machine came in.
The other thing that happened was they realized that they could freeze bagels and ship them to places.
So the bagel logistics were in place.
And then they just had to figure out, well, how do you get people in, let's say, Kansas, where there's no Jewish community, to eat bagels? They decided to use humor, and they did all kinds of crazy things. The management of Lender's Bagels did a bagel ballet, and all of them in tutus. Murray Lender, who was an amazing marketing, genius, actually. He went on the Johnny Carson show, which at the time, was a big late-night show on American television, and talked about bagels and gave Johnny Carson a bagel necklace. This came at the same time that American culture was much more open to celebrating different ethnic cultures. There were a lot of Jewish comedians on television, in the theaters, people were making bagel jokes. It sort of was a perfect storm in a positive sense for them.
And so their plan worked. By the mid-70s, bagels were filling supermarket freezers from Connecticut to California. Eventually, the Lender factory would crank out millions of bagels a day. The bagelization of America was complete. The next stop on our bagel journey brings us full circle, full bagel if you will, right back to Europe.
Bagel mania, how it became Britain's hottest bread.
The bagel makes its way to Spain.
The bagelization of Berlin.
My name is Christopher de Keim. I'm
from the States, and unknowingly, I brought the bagel back to Poland.
Back in Krakow, we're sitting in a bagel cafe on the outskirts of the Jewish quarter.
Most Americans who definitely eat more bagels than anybody in the world don't know that the bagel was born in Poland. I didn't know either, so I was quite shocked, actually. Yeah.
So you decided to open up a bagel shop here before you knew the history?
Exactly, yeah.
What a coincidence.
Yes, that's the story of my life.
A sign on the counter lists 7 flavors of bagels that are on sale, in English and Polish. We've got all the usual suspects.
We have an everything bagel, a sesame bagel, a plain bagel. We have a whole wheat or a graham flour bagel, more brownish. We have an onion bagel. We have a cinnamon raisin bagel, which is our only sweet bagel. And there's one more flavor, poppy bagel.
Christopher grew up in New York, so are his bagels a true taste of the Big Apple?
It's really hard to get high gluten flour here, so ours are lighter. They're chewy, but they're not as dense as a New York bagel. I've used to feel a bit like I'm not doing justice to the bagel, but I've kind of switched my brain a bit. It doesn't need to be exactly like a New York bagel because it's a Krakow bagel, you know?
Of course, we need to see for ourselves. Sam goes for...
Okay, I'm going to do an onion bagel, please. The BLT.
And I order...
Could I please get an everything bagel classic, but with no smoked salmon, please?
My first ever everything bagel, which is basically most of the other toppings all on one bagel, with some added garlic and onion granules for good measure.
The everything bagel is amazing. How have I never had this before? It definitely is a little bit lighter, like he was saying. Yeah. Like it's not quite as dense, but it's good. And oh, so nice to have a BLT. Oh, I feel like this is recharging my American battery a little bit. A trip to Poland is recharging your American battery.
Christopher thinks this Americanness can actually explain the bagel's recent comeback in Europe.
I just think it's another manifestation of people's interest in American, whether it be Hollywood, whether it be food, junk food or non-junk food, culture in general. And this happens to be the place where the bagel was born, so that's quite unique.
The simple bagel hashtag has 2.4 billion views on TikTok. Then there's hashtag BagelTalk, hashtag BagelTime, hashtag BagelAddict, and hashtag RainbowBagel. That bagel took Instagram by storm a few years ago, a multicolored creation topped with funfetti cake cream cheese.
I've never seen it. I love bagels. I buy my bagels at Costco, I'll be real.
And one other trend, the scooped bagel.
Tell me more.
This one apparently comes out of, surprise, surprise, LA. And the idea is you scoop as much of the bready, doughy stuff out so that you can have all the joys of the bagel with fewer carbs.
That's great. I lived in LA for years. That doesn't surprise me in the least.
I'm chatting to Josh Sabika, Associate Professor of Sociology at Colorado State University. His work focuses on things like food justice, food politics, and gentrification.
Food is always connected to people and place, and so you have to look at specific contexts in order to understand, for instance, why something like bagels would be entangled in gentrification.
The bagel made its way to the US very much as a working-class immigrant food. And yet, these days, it often pops up in fancy new cafes, with a fancy price tag to match.
Should every food serve a working class budget? No, not necessarily. But in the context of a gentrifying neighborhood, where a neighborhood is historically working class, and then a food of any kind, bagel or not, comes in and is more expensive than what people are used to paying, that prices people out, and it reflects a larger change in ground rents, both for retail and for residential.
So traditional immigrant food going mainstream can have unintended consequences.
You definitely see that happening in, for example, Mexican-American neighborhoods. All the Mexican food that's in those neighborhoods, maybe some of it becomes attractive to gentrifiers because it's quote-unquote authentic. They start visiting those neighborhoods become attractive, those people get priced out, and then 20 years down the line, you have a hipster taco shop instead of the family-run taqueria.
Josh says food is, of course, always evolving, and there are always going to be food trends.
The bagel moment is perhaps like the kale moment. the savvy restaurateur or the savvy cafe owner or whoever is going to capitalize on those trends because they're a business owner and they need to make money. And if that leads to pricing people out, that's one of the ravages of capitalism.
And what about the bagel's identity? Has it completely lost its Jewish, Polish roots?
Yeah, like on the one hand, maybe it's lost some of its identity, but if food retailers wanting to actually highlight the sort of authentic nature of that food, the exact opposite could be happening, where its identity is centered for the consumer in a particular kind of retail space that wants to sell it in that way, regardless of whether or not the purveyors are Jewish themselves in this case.
So what should the consumer do then if they don't want to be a part of that? Is there anything they can do apart from just say, okay, I won't have a bagel?
I'm not saying don't buy bagels. I think bagels are delicious. But understanding the context within which we make consumer choices does matter. Make an effort to patronize locally owned businesses of long-standing community members. Find those people who have deep attachment to that place and support those people.
That's what's so interesting to me about the bagel, that it's sort of riches to rags to riches.
Maria sees the bagel story as a resoundingly positive one. From the chosen snack of a Polish queen to a symbol of poverty and strife on both sides of the Atlantic, then re-elevated to something special, a treat, both tasty and Instagrammable.
What's hopeful about the bagel is that it has been along this journey, which is a multicultural journey. It's adapting to different cultures, it's adapting to different places, it's adapting to different ingredients, it's adapting to different technologies. And it's still something that makes people smile. A ring is something perfect, right? It's like a halo is something perfect. But the bagel is the human interpretation of that. It's sort of funny, it's sort of lumpy, it's sort of, and at the same time it tastes good. So we love to meet over bagels.
The best bagel order, I think, in New York is got to be like lox with red onion and scallion cream cheese.
I'm a plain bagel with cream cheese kind of girl.
I get a cinnamon with butter.
I like an everything bagel toasted with tofu, scallion, cream cheese, lox, capers, and tomato.
My favorite bagel is unicorn.
Lox and cream cheese on an toasted everything, whole wheat, for me, because I like to make it a little healthy.
Pumpernickel's my go-to bagel. There isn't much really any bagel that I would turn down.
And I reckon you just can't beat a classic cream cheese bagel.
There are many more weird and wacky journeys where that one came from. Just look up Don't Drink the Milk wherever you get your podcasts. Inside Europe will be back with normal programming next week. This week's edition was produced by Helen Seeney, with help from me, Kate Laycock, and sound engineers Ziad Abu Sleiman and Jürgen Kuhn. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn, Germany.